Negrescence, Developing Black and White America, The Black Identity Development Theory by William Cross. William Cross developed the Black Identity Development Theory, studying at Denver University and Roosevelt University. He got his master's in psychology, and part of his clinical training at a mental health facility in Jacksonville, Illinois, Cross observed the process of clients progressing through a series of steps of deconstructing old self-concepts and reconfiguring new. This became embedded in his consciousness, and by the mid to late 60s, the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement was in full swing. He stopped working at the mental health facility and started working for an insurance company, but after the death of Martin Luther King, his crisis encounter, his anger and rage made it impossible, in his own words, to work in an all-white world. So he began to work for a community action organization outside of Evanston, Illinois, and became active in the Black Power movement. He immersed himself in the cultural consciousness and pro-Black immersion that we'll talk about later. He met influential Black leaders and devoured literature on Black studies, and through this went through the conversion process. He witnessed through his observations working with the movers and shakers of the Black community as well as the poor and militant that the conversion that he witnessed transcended social classes. It went through it, everyone had it. Eventually he realized that the community action was not his calling and decided to take a job in urban planning in New York when a friend called and invited him to be the assistant chair in the Office of Afro-American Studies at Princeton. And that's where called with the negrescence theory. In this position, he presented the development theory negrescence in 1971, which comprised of 5 stages: the pre-encounter, encounter, immersion, internalization, and internalization commitment. The pre-encounter stage was characterized by self-loathing and low self-esteem, which was cross-hypothesized, the result of poor mental health. The encounter stage characterized by what he described as the crisis or event that challenges behaviors, those assimilated notions, and previously held ideas. This crisis results in feelings of fear, anger, pain, guilt, and mostly for not realizing that they were brainwashed by white America, or what I call whitewash. Beginning at this stage, the Black person's worldview begins to change, and from this perspective, they move the age. Where Cross states the most sensational aspect of Black identity development, it represents the vortex of psychological negrescence. This is where the nuts and bolts of identity development is worked on. This stage is characterized by withdrawing from the dominant culture, white culture, and immersing themselves into Black culture. We see Cross did this in his community action work with the Black Power movement. He devoured Black literature and really immersed himself in the Black culture. And he describes this as the first step to internalizing one's Black identity. The internalization stage follows, and this is a time of self and cultural discovery and is characterized by less intense emotions of the immersion stage. The anger and guilt and the excessive embracing of anything Black and hating anything white begins to subside. And those intense feelings of the previous stage are put aside. The Black individual begins to iron out the conflicts between the old self and the new beliefs. And once through this calming period, the Black individual owning their self-discovered beliefs looks outward and begins to look for ways to work for the greater good for their race. Through a new lens, working for social justice, change, and continued. In 1991, Cross revised his theory of renegrescence, and this tweaking, if you will, addressed some assumptions he made in the original theory and added additional identities to the stages where Cross believed the original theory fell short. In the pre-encounter stage, Cross negated the assumption that self-loathing and low self-esteem was the result of poor mental health, and instead attributed these characteristics to what he termed miseducation. Miseducation encompassed the negative images of Blacks expressed through mass media, their environment, which includes their parents, extended family, etc. Also in this pre-encounter stage, Cross introduces the term race salience, which refers to the importance or significance one attaches to their race and in turn, how they approach life. He also added 2 identity characteristics of this stage: the pre-encounter assimilation, characterized by low race salience, meaning those that personify this don't attach much significance to their race. They really don't think about it. The second identity buy into Black racial stereotypes and exhibit internalized ethnic disdain. Next, in the immersion stage, Cross added two identity characteristics, and in his original model, he described the anti-white, anti-Black characteristic, but in the new model, he added those singularly, the anti-white or anti-Black, to distinguish from the combination and differentiate one from another. Anti-white is seen as rejecting anything having to do with the white culture and at the same time embracing anything that is part of Black culture. The anti-Black identity is exhibited an unforgiving, almost visceral stance toward those Blacks who they perceive as being pre-encounter or multiculturalists. Finally, 4 and 5 stage he synthesized into just one, and that was called internalization commitment. And it detailed 3 identities that emerged in this stage: the Black nationalist, which was characterized by a high positive race salience; the biculturalist, characterized by a combination of Americanness and Blackness; and the multiculturalist, which is characterized by multiple identity formations such as gender, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, and race. Another aspect of the Negrescence theory is the patterns one exhibits through the lifespan. The Negrescence pattern A is the process of identity development as a result of formative socialization experiences, those interactions with family and significant others during a lifespan. Most Black Americans have this experience, and it's what they assume is their identity by the time they're an adult. Negrescence pattern B is the process of conversion that takes place in stage 2, the encounter stage, and stage 3, the immersion stage, of Cross's Negrescence model. If a Black person hasn't established a healthy identity, it usually occurs in adulthood. Negrescence pattern C is a process that involves an expansion or modification of identity through adulthood, or negrescence recycling. It is clear, though, that whether or not a Black person experiences pattern A or B, they will inevitably experience pattern C. The lifespan model has 6 sectors, beginning with infancy and childhood in the early Black identity development. That involves family income, traditions, practices, the social networks such as school and work, and also historical events all contributed to this early socialization experience for Black children. The pre-adolescent sector is dependent on parental teachings outside the influence than those teachings that are reinforced by outside influences. 3 identity types surface, which would be low salience. Again, that's when the parents have little or no guidance about race. High race salience, where parents who are very involved in teaching their children about the significance and importance of race. And finally, internalized racism. Those children are exposed to negative attitudes about being Black by Black people. This environmental miseducation can cause children to believe stereotypes and adopt negative attitudes about their own race. Entering adolescence, kids tend to accept the identity that they've developed through this socialization without questioning it. Cross refers to this as a foreclosed identity, but as they mature through adolescence, they move into moratorium. This is where it begins the exploration process to form a self-concept. Progressing through the moratorium identity, one eventually attains their authenticated identity. This identity emerges as one begins to form their own beliefs. This new identity may have low race or high race salience, or may still exhibit internalized racism depending on experiences in the foreclosed or moratorium phase. Early adulthood can be characterized with low race salience. One can continue to live in environments where race really isn't an issue, but they're still going to have to deal with issues of institutional racism. They may experience a conversion in adult negrescence if a crisis event forces them to re-examine their race. High race salience can be maintained in the foreclosed identity, and it tends to involve them in the experiences that would identify the sense of their Black identity, or negrescence. Allows them to personalize this sense of Black identity. In the internal racism, those who maintain internal racism identity end up holding on to those embedded beliefs that they had as a child, but eventually, in order to attain a healthy self-concept, they are going to have to go through some kind of conversion. In adult regressance, there are 4 stages. This is where the 4 stages of the model occur. This is where the pre-encounter, encounter, immersion, and internalization takes place of Cross's model. And then finally in Sector 6 is the regressance recycling. That's the part of Pattern C, the lifespan model. And again, it involves revisiting pre-existing self-concepts that are called into question and modifying or re-examining issues that emerge that may affect one's self-concept. Some strengths of Cross's regressance model are, well, that it has stood the test of time. Many other theorists have tried different ideas, but this one is the most widely used and accepted model to describe the Black identity development. His model and subsequent revisions offer a context for therapeutic intervention and counseling, as well as a foundation for academic and social support. Finally, the regressance model provides a basis for understanding the African American or Black experience and how this experience plays a role in their identity development. Some weaknesses of Cross's theory are that he admits that some Blacks never process through regressance or race saliency. Another weakness is that Cross posits that conversion is necessary to establish a healthy Black identity, but what about those individuals who are raised in households with high race salience? Can't it be argued that as a result of their environment, they already have healthy identities? Also, his model doesn't address biracial individuals, and it never addresses the unique Black non-historical experience. For most Black Americans, there is no historical heritage that is uniquely theirs. Most do not know or have little idea of their racial or ethnic traditions, so all of their historical markers have been assimilated. So how does regressance theory apply to African American population, and how can they use it? They can use the model to substantiate their experience, to actually name it. They can see the role family, friends, and traditions, as well as societal institutions, such as churches and schools, have impacted their own race salience. They can also start the conversation about the role oppression has played and plays in their identity development. Regressance provides generalizations for identity development, but it's important to recognize individual differences. Cross stated that his model can also outline how one can learn to live and negotiate the imposed notions of race and work through their own personal journey of what being Black means to them. And finally, the concept of conversion and internalization can teach how to embrace their Blackness and their ethnicity. In Cross's model and in his life, we can see how history can play a pivotal role. Even looking at our own lives, we can look back at historical events, and we can notice that we have vivid recollection of where we were at the time. For many Americans, the election of Barack Obama was one such watershed event, but for Black Americans, it can easily be seen as an encounter experience based on the regressance model. His election was a significant race-related event, like Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus, or the 1964 Civil Rights Act, or Martin Luther King's walk on Washington, or even his assassination. The extent to which an event is relevant is directly related to one's race and to the individual or their race salience. For those individuals with low race salience, they're more likely to experience a race-related event, such as the election of the first Black American president, as an encounter, just like Martin Luther King's assassination was for Cross, though obviously the difference being the election is a more positive race-related event. Cross's regressance serves as an explanation of the mechanisms through which minorities, and in particular Black people, become aware of the internalized racism, and they develop a more positive racial self-concept. Cross's regressance theory can be used by student development professionals in a number of ways. It reminds us that it's necessary to be self-aware of our own biases and utilize our multicultural skills and competencies when interacting with Black students. It's imperative first and foremost that we form those alliances of trust with our Black students, understanding that they have most likely experienced a lifetime of mistrust of whites and the institution